let me say thank you so much for this opportunity. It's always a great pleasure to speak to Dimitri and Maria's group, and Oksana, thanks to them very much always, and to Oksana Medvedeva. What else can I say? Hello from Oxford. It's the sun has finally come out, the first wink of sun in the day, and I hope the weather is good where you are as well. Shall I start then?
Yeah.
Okay, what I wanted to talk about today is what I call refining and editing from a good paper to a submission for publication. In other words, you have a paper in front of you which looks like something that could be published. It's at that point that I want to intervene in what happens to that paper. Just you sort of finished it up, you've done all your paragraphs, it looks good, you've corrected a lot, you've corrected much of the manuscript. Oh, boom. So I want to talk about that experience which we all have. I just got it not a few weeks ago, of rejection. Now, and I want to, as you probably already know, let me say that there are two kinds of rejections. One is the desk rejection. That is the editor, him or herself, makes that decision. And the other is the peer review rejection. And then how do you go on from there? Well, I want to divide the whole revision process. Sometimes people ask me to proofread a manuscript, but that's not really what's at stake. What's really at stake are large scale versus small scale edits. And I have yet to get a manuscript, and I read a manuscript whenever you guys send it. I love read it with care. It's exciting to me. This is something I do. I'm a methodologist. Large scale revisions and small scale edits. And then last of all comes proofreading. So basically what I like to do is all three of these things. I don't do it. I just simply say where the fix might be useful. So why do we get these letters? Well, there are factors beyond our control, as you well know. Competition is, of course, increasing. This is just a chart from 1990 through 2008, but look at that curve, journal submissions, really, really tough. This is a bit obvious, but I review it because it's important and it's really not nice. Okay. The percentage of published submitted and the ratio of published to submitted manuscripts for countries whose share of published papers is at least 1% globally. Now, these kinds of figures are put out by Nature. And so, but look at just in this regard, the way it's set up. It's a little hard to read. If you see the published as a ratio to submitted, that is your red box. And therefore you see that red box goes way up there as far as it goes to about 30% for the US. Denmark is a little under 20%. South Korea, as you know, you have superb scholars in South Korea. We're getting like a ratio of 7%. Switzerland, a little further. Now, to be sure, as I suspect, they don't say, but these are publications in Nature. In Nature. It's there all. And here we go, social science, worldwide. It's not the same set of data. I wanted to simply illustrate to you that the world out there is in effect not fair. No one's ever made things fair for me, and it's a struggle, it's a fight, it's such a fight.
May I
but
interrupt?
Russia is a country I love, and there ought to be ways to help this, and one of them would be to help you guys get published in a high impact journal. And of course, there are many high impact journals now in Russia, and I think those are quite exciting. So I've talked about that in previous webinars. Here, I simply wanted to point out social science research in 2020, and you can see that the dominant guys are, at least in terms of citations. Now, the one thing I wanted to point out about this chart, please, is the green. The green. Many times Russians do not self-cite often enough. Okay, so I'm hearing someone's conversation.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna detect who actually has his microphone on. And also there is a question in the chat,
Okay.
but I think you kind of answered it.
Oh, did I? That one?
Well, yeah. Svetlana asked, what about Russia?
Okay. Oh, yeah, exactly. I tried to find it, but I didn't find it. Oh, Russia is number 16 in the social sciences. That's what, I didn't find it for the first chart, but here it is in this one. In the social sciences, all of them. Russia is number 16. China is number 6. China, as you know, has been really working on the number of publications in the country, and that is a very smart thing to do, opening new journals, and so is Russia. But China is like trying to flood the market, and that will very much improve the statistics. But a lot of major powerhouses, Taiwan, Belgium, and Norway are lower than Russia in the social sciences. So we've got a good crew. We've got a nice social science crew here. Okay, this is the point that I thought I would love to, at some point, take a little bit further. Here we are, reviews, okay, reviewers, peer reviewers. And look again what we have here. We have contributions and peer reviewers. But look, 10 papers to 25 reviewers is the ratio. So they have far more reviewers than they have accepted papers. And India is okay, it's getting there. That is not accepted papers, submitted papers. In other words, what we're getting is a lot of access for US scholars to the peer review process. China is right there in second place, United Kingdom, Japan, Germany, Canada, Australia, English language speakers, Brazil. So we have to tear that apart a bit more in terms of what journals we're really talking about, but this in itself is in some ways very interesting. So I think the way to approach this really, if I were going to try to do it, is to see if one couldn't get Russian journals with the Russian area, I think might well be obliged to have at least one person from the Russian Federation as a peer reviewer on articles. That would be great. Okay, in some fields, you will struggle for recognition. And this is something we all know. Once again, it's something we can do little about it. Just as for a tongue in the cheek remark, 98% of articles published in the arts and humanities are never cited. In the social sciences, fortunately, it's 45%, but even in the hard science, 25% of the articles are never cited. So you want those citation indexes. Factors, here we go, that you can control. This is the first and most important thing that I wanted to say, although it still doesn't directly relate on what would happen to your journal in what I call the fix. So the first thing that you think about is that you don't want to get rejected. And your first concern is the journal interested in what I have to say? And then you think, does my style of writing and style of argumentation match the journal's? Those things are so essential. It's hard to imagine life without thinking about that. For example, I tend to be interdisciplinary, but then I find that life becomes more difficult because when you're interdisciplinary, you generally tend to publish in disciplinary fields. For example, I publish in economics and history. And in economics, it's really tough to break into it, but you know exactly what they require. You can't do any storytelling in economics. You know, you have to go right straight to the abstract says what your conclusion is, and your first paragraph talks about the model. Your second and third paragraph says what's in the article. Then you get into data and methods, and you only talk about data to the extent that economists need to know about it, as some major literature is cited, and then model, results, conclusion, full stop. So if you're interdisciplinary, as I am, and want to publish in economics, you better have an economist on board. So that's a good argument for a collective, collaborative scholarship, which I like. I do it a lot, okay. Economic history? No. These guys are historians. They're a little different in the United States, where they're more hard science, but in Europe, they're more into storytelling. They want to know the story. They want to know how, and they would love things on Russia. And they tell me all the time that they do, but it needs that story. You have to tell them a lot about it. So they're historians, basically, at heart. Whereas in the United States, they're more economists. You have to keep this in mind when you're doing your own work. And then I extend my discussion of the social sciences to public health and demography, just to simply say, in both of those fields, there are very rigorous standards. But you can always publish and get credit for it in professional magazines and professional journals. So each one of these fields is slightly different. And being interdisciplinary, also, it's important to understand that vocabulary is very different. So that a word you might easily use for history is not going to fit into most economics. Certain words, not all of them, but you just can't say it that way. You have to be more clear. It has to be structured. It has to be in model format. You have to be able to model virtually every one of your sentences. And that's a vocabulary issue, in my view. So again, if you're interdisciplinary, you pick up the vocabulary and the style of both of these, and you can't escape it. So when you're looking for a journal, focus on the discipline where you're strongest. So let's talk about rejection for just a few minutes, a sad topic, but one from which I learn. Desk rejection and peer review rejection. So first of all, let's see what happens with desk rejection. And there we go. Preparing you for the big one, the selection of the wrong journal. The foremost reason your manuscript gets rejected is that your research study doesn't fit the scope of your selected journal. And many journals, for example, the American Economics publishes macro, micro, and then it also, American Economics Association publishes the literature review, and separately big articles, the big things, and they're mainly thematic. Virtually every journal has such an orientation. And how do you find that out? You have to read their description, and it's under instructions for authors. So read the scope of the journal on its homepage. But there are other little tricks that I want to talk about here as we go along. Some journals will not read over a certain number of pages. The Russian Review will not, it basically reads about 15 pages, and that's it. Many will not read over 10. Some will let you go on to 20 pages. So then you have to decide, how do you determine the thematic preferences of journals? Before I go there, let me suggest that the only way to do that is, say you read an article for your paper, and it's by someone, and it raises the issue of COVID. You look where that person has published, you go to that journal, and you look at the past year, all of the issues. Is there a lot of COVID stuff there? Well, that's the right place to publish it. If you go to another kind of journal, where the editors have already become a little sated with submissions on COVID, it might not be there, and they're not going to welcome that. So you do not want to get rejected from what I might call a knee-jerk position. Whoop, reject it. Put in the other pile. Oh, that's not about what we do. You do not want to get rejected because the empirics that you're developing in your social science article, and unfortunately, I'm really only talking to social science because that's the thing that I know. If your journal article requests your journal always likes certain kinds of empirics, then you must have those kinds. You must have certain charts. You must have certain robustness checks. And you will only find out which ones they prefer by looking at the journal. And that's why when I write, as I said, for economics or economic history, I always write with an econometrician who can do that for me. He reads the econometrics journals and knows exactly what he has to cite. So that would get you desk rejected, the wrong test. Why do they say? Why do the editors say? When something comes in, they send it out again without reading it carefully first. They always talk about plagiarism, but I think at our level, at the level you and I are talking about, we don't need to talk about that. Okay. Too few references. They might assume, if you don't have a reasonable, in the social science, reasonable might be 10 references, that there's something going on there that they don't know about, and have a question in their minds which would cause them to put your paper in the wrong pile. No reference to another work you published, for example, on the same or similar research, if the article that you submit is 15 pages. You're talking about something in fairly broad terms. You're very aware of what the issues are and the sources. The first thing that's going to cross their mind is you've written this before. And so they look in your references, they don't see a citation to your own article, and they toss it in the reject sign. So you be careful in your first paragraph to cite your previous work. Not only that, but if you cite their previous work, you get more citations, and it improves your university's ranking. Okay. This one is a toughie. This one is a toughie. Right author, but wrong title. Right author, but wrong year. So one doesn't always know the secret to this. So the secret is giving your article before submission to someone in the field who will then say, oh, but you haven't cited Bloom, Bloom, and Bloom. One reason to do this is because you can't possibly catch everyone writing on a certain theme. Another is its recency. They're very keen that you know the classics, but they also want to make sure that you know something published last year. So you cite, in my work on railroads, Dan Bogart. Well, he's published 5 things. 4 of those things are published. 5 is out in manuscript form. So I'm not sure it's been published, so I don't cite it. Who knows? So right author, but wrong title. And one very distinguished guy who's close to being a Nobel Prize winner once said that he cited the wrong year for a major publication, and it was cause for rejection. But you can also assume that this particular author's writings may have been controversial. And that, of course, at that level would be something, it might be not desk rejected, but peer review rejected. And then, of course, as I say, omission of a major author in your area of research. This, I think, should be fairly clear, but it's not necessarily clear to you if you're interdisciplinary. And it's not necessarily clear to you unless you write somebody really major in your field and say, this is a paper I'm thinking of and it's an early draft form. Can you please look to make sure that I have all my references right? Then one person whom I'm advising at the stage of a master's thesis said, what can I do? I didn't get any significances in anything significant in my statistical apparatus. Well, my response is change the focus and get something elsewhere that's statistics, or suggest why it's important, even though it's insignificant, according to statistical tests. Generally, this is what the journals say, that they really only accept original research and those which report not only a high quality novel work, but make a contribution to the field, and that's meaning that it doesn't contribute significantly. A contribution is considered a significant contribution. Fortunately or unfortunately, this is why in my field Donald McCloskey rails against the use of significance. It has a certain meaning statistically, but for a historian, it doesn't always make what you said unimportant. So be careful if you get a low significance indicator. You can still argue that something you only explained, say, 16% of the variation. But nevertheless, that 16%, if you're a demographer, may be very significant. But you have to tell them that. The editor is not necessarily going to tell them that. So, to summarize, search the published literature and recent issues of relevant journal related to your work so you don't miss any current author. Publish only those findings which are new or significant. And number 4 here is compare your article with previous work in the field to justify your contribution, your improvements with a clear statement. And then I plead with the works that I read by major Russian scholars, sometimes send me their works just to review. Almost never do I find that those authors have highlighted what they're doing, the novel properties of the research. Get it out there. This research is important because this paper makes a contribution to the literature in that it clarifies blank, blank, and blank as factors that are influential. And this has never been done before. Or the only time this has been done before was in an article 20 years ago in which the newest methods of econometrics were used. So number 3 of all of these, number 3, certainly the most important. In any case, if you want a high impact journal, you really have to know the relevant literature, and leaving no stone unturned. You have to search that out, and you need to be completely confident that you have found similar studies and addressed why yours is better. I hope this is clear, and that the next time someone sends me a manuscript, I won't have to advise the redoing of paragraph 1. Paragraph 1 is where you say, this is really significant. My results are astonishing. Even if you don't fully believe it. Should I say that? No. Okay, take that back. Discrepancy between the abstract, and these are technical reasons why you can get a desk reject. Discrepancy between the abstract and the remaining manuscript. In other words, the abstract says why this is important, but then in the remaining manuscript, you don't repeat that. You go on to say something else. And I say, huh? I thought this article was about that. Study of the wrong groups. In other words, you identified groups for testing your hypothesis, but according to the editor, these are the wrong groups. Now, that may be a matter of editorial preference. Wrong statistics, statistically insignificant results, absence of a relation between the results and their discussion, and contradictory or false data. Sometimes editors give a rejection when the instructions that they've clearly set out have not been followed. And just for an example, why they reject, this is in the American Political Science Review, and it tells you exactly when you're going to get a desk reject. Manuscript insufficiently original or innovative, lacks evidence to support the claims it advances, employs an inappropriate research design, fails to engage the relevant literature, all those things which I've just said in other ways, or is poorly written. So that's, when we talk about refinement, that's where I'm moving. And before I get there, I just look at this peer reviewer's rejection. And I say that these are incredibly useful. It could be that the peer reviewer just doesn't like you, or doesn't like the point you're making, or disagrees. And that may mean that you've not cited his or her work. And they generally try to send it to the authority in the field. But these letters are very useful, and the next time you submit to another journal, go through it carefully. Or even when resubmit, when it says, cannot accept at this time, but resubmit, you have to, of course, fix every single point. And usually these problems, I have an alert sign here, but can be fixed fairly easily. So the fix. Large scale, in which you're required to make substantive changes, reorder paragraphs, delete sections, and rewrite sections, and editing. So when you ask someone for help, you say, can you help me revise this? Or you say, can you help me edit this? But least of all, would you say, can you help me proofread this? Because that means read it, find a few errors, eliminate them. So basically, I suspect what might be useful to people in your profession at your location, your level, is actually both large scale and small scale. So revising and editing. So if you wanted to write, you say, can you help me with the revising and the editing of this? And if you get someone right in your field, you're lucky and they can really help you. Large scale. And the thing I guess I want to say, after having spent an excruciating 3 months revising, believe it or not, the first and second paragraph of an article, which is now accepted, the first and second paragraph, I realized that the entire thing depended upon a different grasp of the subject matter. And so I reread about 100 articles, trying to understand where exactly this fit in and did it have the right slant to appeal to this journal. And it was worth it, I guess. So I think the process that you would subject yourself to if you in fact turned to me with an article you wanted to revise for publication is there's no way to say it, it's grueling. Okay. So here we go on large scale, the focus of your work. I read it and sometimes I feel, first of all, the first paragraph doesn't tell me what the significance is, and that's the first thing I do. I need to know, I even send it back. I have to know what the significance of this is. And then I don't have a feel from the first paragraph what the organization of it is. So I don't know what the whole story is, even though it's not my field. I need to know the whole story so that I can figure out the focus and whether that's well distinguished in paragraph 1. And then my one second thought is this the whole story? Is the person trying to tell too much of the story? Because if you're trying to say too much, as a reader, I'm not going to believe it. Are you telling too much of the story? Do your sources really allow you to do that? Are your generalizations really based on hard evidence? Then you want to say, am I, of course, and sometimes when someone will send me something, I say, I'm not really the right person. I'm sorry, I can read this for you and help you. But you have to understand who you're targeting. I had someone submitting an article or an application for a job. And I say, this is not really well written. I said, the reader is not going to like it. And she said, well, I like it. I said, huh? Who are you writing for? But fortunately, this is a person with whom I go back and forth, and I tend to be blunt, and she tends to be nice. But I said, no, you're not writing for yourself. If that's the case, put it in a drawer and lock it up. You're writing for somebody, and we need to know who that is. Organization and paragraphs, are they clear? Point of view, is it consistent? And this is for your peer-reviewed, so you've gotten past the desk editor, so it's a pretty good piece. But you're still going to get nailed if it's not consistent. So we go over this again. Is your argument clear? Is it quite clear to me why you should focus on this and not on that? Given the journal's interests, for example, COVID, from what perspective do they understand COVID? From the perspective of those not yet vaccinated, from the perspective of inequality, like you might say, Tony Atkinson or Branko Milanovic? Are you going for that level of concern, or is it more of a medical one? So how, in fact, effective are the health services at rolling this out? Is it a leadership and coalition political science piece on COVID? Is it clearly that, or do you also drift along into something else? In which case, your first paragraph should pull back and more effectively lay it out for this particular journal. Once again, same message beginning and end, organization clear. One of the things I like to add, and I always ask if they will add, and sometimes people who send me their manuscripts do not add it anyway, don't understand. Third paragraph, latest fourth paragraph, a very simple for the social sciences paragraph in which it said, this paper is about, and it is organized in 4 parts. I had one that was 5 parts and I couldn't get it down. Part 1 tells the background, or part 1 examines the literature which have dealt with this. Part 2, in this 4th paragraph, 3rd paragraph, that's what you're saying. Part 1, this paper is organized in 4 parts, part 1, part 2. Part 3 concerns data and method, or as my econometric colleague always tells me, that part 3 is the model. Part 4 is the results. Part 5 is the conclusion. And one journal editor said, no, part 5 is discussion, because some journal editors prefer the concept of discussion to the concept of conclusion. Right? So you have to do that, and you have to read articles in this journal to find out what these editors prefer. And I'm going to focus for the next thing that I have to say, which is pretty much the big thing that I have to say. Transitions. And I don't know how to explain it. But one of the things that I miss that in my review of manuscripts and in my work with PhD students that I frequently miss is a good understanding of what transitions do. And transitions in English are quite different from transitions in Russian. Transitions in terms of sentence structure, I'm sure you've heard this 1,000 times, but I'll repeat it because it's important, concern the location of words. But transitions that I'm talking about now are within paragraphs and from paragraph to paragraph. And so you would use little words, but mainly, I think I spent years trying to teach myself how to write because I didn't do very well when I was in grade school. And by the time I got to high school, it was a very competitive place. I needed to learn. So I literally looked at magazines and articles. How do they do these transition things? I was always being told my writing was choppy. And choppy writing comes from no transitions. But choppy writing also comes from sentences that are too short. I was even being criticized for that in graduate school, choppy writing. Okay. So transitions. Generally speaking, rule of thumb is in each paragraph, one idea, well developed. And the last sentence in the first paragraph should lead you to the first sentence in the next paragraph. And similarly, at the end of one part, you say, in the next part, I will explain the reason why these quotes are not entirely accurate for the writings of Chayanov. Can I suggest that you balance the length of the paragraph? Sometimes I find in reading Russian works that the length of paragraphs by long tradition are too short. Paragraphs are too short, 2 or 3 sentences. The first thing I inevitably say, you've got to give me long paragraphs. And sometimes you need to move material from the paragraph to the appendix just so the paragraph is clear. I hope that's clear. That's really the transition thing is really, really important. And I think sometimes I don't emphasize it enough. Okay, here is a little cartoon about what happens and why it's so much work and why one might spend 3 months on 2 paragraphs. Okay, that's a lot of time. And figure that I sit here working all day long every day, especially during the pandemic. Okay, that's a lot of time. And it's way too much time. But you get this sense when you're finishing, like in this cartoon, and he says to himself, she says, finish another paragraph, did we? And he says, I am a writing god. You get this feeling that you powerfully changed your and it's great. That's a great feeling. You're on course to change. Significant, like removing or moving paragraphs can seem like very, very big thing, and it can be a big deal. This is called major tweaking. Okay, now we move to small scale revisions. And here too, I can't emphasize the importance of when someone might send me a paper to help them revise it, even though it's not my field. I'm extremely slow, and I think it's because the process of thinking and writing for me is slow. Maybe some of you are faster, but with those of you who sympathize with me, you'll understand that sometimes it takes a long time to say, is that sentence really in the right place? So that's the kind of stuff that goes on in small scale revisions when it's really good. You got the organization, you got the thinking right. First paragraph is clear. Your results are consistent. Everything is apportioned into 4 or 5 parts. 3 parts is also okay. But what's wrong with this sentence? You say to yourself, is there one word that's throwing this sentence off? And that's what happened to me. And the article was about the Russian Revolution, which seemed to me to be powerfully pushed forward by networking, as we might call it. And I couldn't quite get it right. What's the balance, depending on what journal I send it to, what's the balance between talking about networking and talking about revolutionary agitation? How do I separate those two things? And it's not easy. I mean, the reader will be familiar with the agitation story, maybe 100,000 books on that topic. But the reader is not familiar with the network story. And so you have to supply some of that information without crowding out the other one. So this is a kind of a small scale revision that could take forever. So what are the elements? I love this cartoon because it's so awful. We loved all the words in your manuscript, sir, but we were wondering if you could maybe put them in a completely different order. Okay, are your sentences clearly written? And one of the things that one would do in reading for small scale revisions is look for sentence fragments. And frankly, Russians don't use many sentence fragments. This is a common mistake with English language speakers, but not Russians. Comma splices, sometimes. That means you have a run-on sentence which is separated by a comma. And I think Russian writers may sometimes feel that their sentences are too short in English, but English really loves that short sentence. And it should come after a longer one. Another thing that might be sometimes not well understood in Russian by translators who are translating your work, and then you would say, send it to me or someone else, is the verb. And verbs are very important. The verb in Russian is frequently passive. And I'm sure you know this because all of you have had academic writing. And some of you have been to these webinars and they probably emphasize it forever. So you have this is happening process. And in Russian, you really don't need to or like to say by whom. It doesn't matter so much because the action is in this beautiful verb with all of its lovely forms and prefixes and suffixes. And that's a lot of action, and it's very beautiful, perfectly descriptive, and I love it. I have to tell you, I love Russian. The language is so beautiful. Okay, so, but English doesn't like that. English wants that action verb. In fact, you can write an entire paper filled only with active tenses, and you'll be better off. No passives. No, it was done by. No, it occurred in the city of blah, where blah, 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 blah. No. In the city of blah, the mayor in 1920s made 5 decisions. Blah, blah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Summary, next paragraph. One of those decisions was critical for the town's future. So you want to tell a story, but tell it all in terms of the mayor having done it. It's not that in English, we need to know about the mayor. We understand the same as Russians do, that things are much more subtle. It took more than one mayor to make a decision. But somehow the English language loves that sense of heroes, sense of action, sense of dramatic personae. And I think it's ever since the writings of Hemingway. But I'm not an English professor, so what do I know? Okay. So passive verbs is a problem, and then pronoun errors. And then, of course, I'm not even going to mention the problem with the word the. I don't think I've ever read a Russian manuscript which has it completely right. There's no the in the Russian language, and you wouldn't need it, obviously, because nouns and forms are too specific. You know exactly when you're talking about a collective noun. You know exactly when you're talking about a general noun or a specific person doing something. You can put that in the verb. But in English, you can't. So in English, you have to put it in the the. But you know that. I'm not sure there's anything you can do about it. You just learn by association and reading a lot of English. You'll learn where to put it and where to not. So you always have someone read your manuscript before sending it in to take it out and put it in. That would be my advice, of course, once again. One thing that Russians do have is a love of words. If you think of opera, and there are 2 countries you want, whose language you want to sit there and listen to for hours and hours, Italy and Russia, right? Oh, the words, the sounds are just magnificent, right? But in English, in contemporary English social science language, appreciation is very low for musicality. And there are some, A.J.P. Taylor in English was an English historian, and it was his books that I tried to imitate so well because they were broad and big, classy, wonderful, short and long. Someone seems to be calling me. Just turned it off. Sorry. So the second thing, apart from passive verbs, is redundancy. And sometimes, and this may not be entirely clear, and it's just my opinion, so I could be wrong, but this is what I sometimes read adjectives and paragraphs which are redundant. In other words, someone will repeat something in another way of saying it, but that repetition is fatal for a manuscript. Don't repeat anything, nothing, anywhere, except in the introduction and the conclusion, because your reader will be aware of it. For some reason, English language readers are very aware of that. And whole paragraphs need to be thrown out. You may be surprised and say, well, why did you throw out that paragraph? Because you already said that in the one before. But in Russian, as I say, like in French, the repetition is a good thing, not a bad thing, because you change it slightly. You alter it. You make it philosophically more concrete. But in the social sciences, unfortunately, I don't think there's much room for that. Another error, which is common, is the repetition of keywords. And you say, well, why is that? And there are a couple of reasons, really. I've given one here, but one is that every time reading is, in fact, a playing of images in your head. When I read, like I was reading about Chayanov last night, all of these images of what he thought, and it's almost as if I moved toward the moment that he was executed, and I couldn't leave that moment. So reading is an emotional experience, but in the social sciences, you want to contain that emotion. And one of the things that big, loud words does, like cataclysm, revolution, that's a remarkable event. You spoke with great lucidity, is that it leaves an impression on your reader, at least the English language. And I sit there sort of stunned. Oh, lucid? Wow, that's really strong. But then if I encounter that again and I see that the writer is simply using words a lot, doesn't understand the significance of using it. So it's considered bad form in English to use these big words more than once. Sometimes once in an entire manuscript will do. And you say, why is that? Because it works once. No, with the second time the reader will say, I don't believe it anymore. He's used it once, but these two situations are not comparable. So why does he use it there when he doesn't use it there? Okay. And then, as I said, transitions on the major level, large scale, and transitions in the small scale, between sentences. So your word placement here is the important thing. You have the important word in the beginning, but you also save one important word for the end, because the end of the sentence will lead to the next sentence, which will pick up that word by using it, by using the same subject. As in, ideally, a paragraph in an English manuscript every paragraph should have one subject and one only, so that all those sentences refer to the one idea or the one concept you're trying to get across. Okay, I've probably talked exhaustively about that. And the easiest kinds of transitions, if you're not sure how to do it, is just another instance of this. The second argument, your new paragraph is, or, apart from this, the literature also focuses on blah. And between paragraphs, you want that transition to be absolutely clear so that the reader doesn't stumble. Some readers only read the first sentence of a paragraph and then they go on to the next paragraph. So that transition has to be extremely clear if you understand what I mean. I mean, English language readers tend to read very fast. I'm not sure Russians do. I think Russians are more careful about reading through every particular word. They have to be, because they don't know what something means unless they consider the word ending. So word order is rigid in English, and the place of the word is, as I say, important. Then I would talk about balance and diversity. Paragraphs, long paragraphs, again, as in the case of sentences, balance with short paragraphs, and paragraphs a little bit longer than you might want them. And I was told that hard lesson actually in graduate school by a colleague of mine. He said, no. He said, your paragraphs are way too short. Because in a history, in other words, not economics, in economics, you like those short paragraphs, but in history, paper, long, deep, elaborate, clear paragraphs with lots of footnotes. In economics, no footnotes, just a few references. Each reference is author date. So very different fields have very different preferences. And then, of course, clarity and elegance are what you will. And if you send something to me to be read, and I'm delighted if you should do so, I do read them for clarity and elegance, because you want to impress that not only the desk editor, but also the peer reviewer. As we move toward the final phase of proofreading, none. How many mistakes are you allowed? 0. So you can't, typographical errors, all that sort of stuff, no. For an English language publication, if you submit something in English, now if you're a foreigner and if it's clear from your, say, last name or from the word expressions and so forth, there's a little bit of slippage, and they say, well, yeah, okay, you need to get an English language speaker involved in the writing of this paper, they will say. Resubmit and have someone review it for English language. But if you're in worse shape, if you're an English language speaker and they can tell that, and you make, say, 2 typos. 2 typos, you say. How could they reject me for 2 typos? Think of the competition. Okay, how many wrong words can you be allowed to slip by your proofreading? Well, wrong word. In other words, you meant to say home, but instead you said residence. Right? Pretty simple slip. But the word has an entirely different resonance. Home, residence. Or maybe you meant to say residence because it's more of a population social science word, but you actually said home. That this household was not at home. That's a mistake. So how many of those mistakes, the wrong word, can you get away with? Well, none if you're an English language speaker. But a few, of course, if you're working from a translation. And towards closing of this presentation, I wanted to repeat that this is pretty much, you can find this in any of the instructions for authors. I go back to this American Political Science Review, probably the major political science journal in the United States. The editors determine their own desire that the manuscript is insufficiently original or innovative, that it lacks evidence to support the claim, or employs inappropriate research, or it fails to cite the relevant literature, or is poorly written. And that's big. So all of this is quite serious. Your last checks, of course, are proofreading. So when you ask someone to proofread a manuscript, it should be almost perfect. You're simply asking them to fix some grammatical spelling, punctuation, after writing every draft and before submitting it for comment. Check for the flow and tone, and make sure that there are no typos. And this is a very different process from revising and editing. So if you'd like me to help with any of these stages, make clear what stage you're at. Big revisions, small revisions, or proofreading. Better? Stop share. Okay, guys, any questions? Oh, chats. I see we have chats. Oh, what about Russia?
Yeah. Well, there is a question.
Yeah. Passive verbs. No repetition of keywords. What about standard terms? Oh, exactly. You can obviously you can repeat standard terms, and in fact, probably standard terms you have to repeat, because if you use some other terminology for something that's standard, then it would be confusing. So I guess what I really mean is an adjective that what one doesn't repeat is an adjective about significance. You don't repeat a single word. So this is the most significant theory in our century, but you wouldn't want to say that twice because you've already said it. And the reader says, no, of course you're right. Yes. Standard terms are essential to be consistent with. Anything else? Did I give you my this is my email. Yeah. And that's my email. I'm delighted to work with you in something, and if it helps. Somebody I worked with got a nice publication out of it in psychology. But all the manuscripts that I've read are really, really good. Show it. It's just a matter of bringing out that. This is a first-rate institution, right? So it's just a matter of bringing out that that specialness and eliminating stuff that is not relevant, putting some stuff in the appendix. Oh, thank you so much, Elena. Thank you. I'm glad. Slava. Okay.
I also wanted to take a word and thank you, because pretty much everything that you said summed up my experience that I had with my work sample while I had to polish it and revise it. And I remember what I call to be the Russian problem, that we do really love the long sentences.
Yeah.
And it hurts so much to just cut it and to get away from being very Tolstoyan.
Yes. The very thing that you love to read in Russian. Oh, my Facebook. The Facebook posts are so magnificent, and the creativity and the words.
Yes, it's a form of an art in the Russian Facebook. It never ceases to amaze me.
I love it. I love it. It's, you know, it's poetry. So
thank you again.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to meet you all.
Okay, so my last question for all is that, oh, she left. So thank you all.